Welcome back to Windows on the World. John Spottiswoode is chairman of Hampshire Against Fluoridation, and he joins us now via Skype in Southampton, England. Hello, John.
Hiya. Hello.
Hi. Welcome to Windows on the World. So just tell us about your organisation.
Right, well, basically, in 2008, they started to try to force us to have fluoridation, or water fluoridation in Hampshire, or Southampton area in particular. And we were formed about then to resist that, basically. And since then, we've been campaigning to stop it. There was a big consultation in 2008, for instance, a so-called consultation, but in fact it was a sales exercise by the local strategic health authority who wanted us to take fluoride. And in fact, there was a vote on that, and there was 72% opposed it, but they still decided they wanted to go ahead. They knew better. And so we've had to fight in various ways. There has been a court case, you said that the Strategic Health Authority, well, which we didn't actually run, it was run by a local resident, and the local legal aid, and saying that they were allowed to do it, it was within their power to do it, by opposition, strong opposition. And it's been going on since then. And recently, the Strategic Health Authority was disbanded, which meant, according to the legislation, to be understood, that the scheme was therefore had to be abandoned because it wasn't established. It hadn't been, there's no contract signed, there's nothing on the ground, there's no scheme area defined, no cost defined, no environmental assessment done, all sorts of things haven't been done. But still, now the Public Health England, the new body, are trying to push it through, saying they think it is an established scheme, despite all of the local councils being against it, all of the MPs being against it, 72% of people being against it, they still want to do it. Which is a farce, really.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because we got onto the press officer. We've gone onto Southern Water, and it's we asked them for a comment. And it says, "Hi there. Unfortunately, we're not available for any interviews regarding fluoride. This is a Public Health England scheme. Therefore, it will be more appropriate for you to speak to someone there. Many thanks, Layla, Southern Water Press Office." So we called the Public Health England scheme, and they said, "I'm sorry, but we won't be able to get someone for you this afternoon. If you want to give me some questions, I might be able to provide written answers. Thanks." So they didn't want to come on the show, and they didn't really want to comment. It's interesting, just for viewers out there, the FDA, this is the Washington Post in 1997, and they've changed the warning on toothpaste, fluoridated toothpaste, and it says, this is actually the warning they put on toothpaste in America now, fluoridated toothpaste. "If you accidentally swallow more than used for brushing, seek professional help or contact the Poison Control Centre immediately." Are you aware of that, John?
I was, yes. Yeah, ridiculous. They put that on there, but then they say, well, just drink it in your water supply forever, whenever you're living in a fluoridated area.
Yes.
And what happens is, when we try and speak to Public Health England or anyone in the health authority, they always wheel out their dental people on the basis that they say it is a dental issue, where our main objections are what it does to the rest of the body. There's all sorts of damage to the thyroid, to the IQ, to joints, and it will got a whole range of things. It is suspected that it leads to some cancers, but they just don't talk about that. They say that there's no proof. Well, what the situation is there's been studies all around the world showing all these things and reproducing them in different places, but because they are epidemiological, i.e. they are just looking at populations, then they say, well, that's not proof, it could be some other reason that's causing it. So, for instance, they found there was 5 or 6 times as much osteosarcoma, bone cancer in young men in fluoridated areas than in non-fluoridated areas, but they say, well, that could be down to something else, so we're not taking notice of that. Then they say that a lower IQ faces fluoride. Well, I'm taking notice of that either. It could be something else. And so they refuse to listen to all the big red light warnings about dangers of fluoride, because fluoride is a known poison at a low level. That is why it is used. That's why it's used in all rat poison and things like that. Well, for animals, for killing flies and things like that. It's a very effective poison at very low doses. So they don't sort of think this applies to humans, because it does.
very interesting, yeah.
They just don't listen to the arguments. It's government policy, so they don't listen to the arguments.
It's just a policy. I've got a quote here from, this is from a toothpaste manufacturer, and this is somebody who worked there. It says, when I received the fluoride here, it has a skull and bones on it. This woman says, I won't mention the name, she says of containers of the chemical at Princeton, New Jersey laboratories of a major company. She's the Director of Research and Development for Oral and Personal Care. And they actually have a quote here. If a child was to take a big spoonful of this fluoride, I don't think he could swallow it, she says. But if he did get it down, it is a poison and the child could die. If a child ingested a whole tube of toothpaste, he should be taken right to the emergency room. He will either get his stomach pumped or some kind of antidote. Even though it is an over-the-counter drug, we are altering the body when we brush our teeth with a fluoride toothpaste or gel. And it also says this is in America, on toothpaste tubes, keep out of the reach of children under 6 years of age. So that's
no children under 6 should certainly brush their teeth with fluoride at all, because what happens with children is they tend to eat the toothpaste apart from the health.
Yeah.
And so that is really dangerous, and that is a big reason why we get dental fluorosis even where you don't have fluoride in the water. Our children get overdosed with fluoride just from the toothpaste.
Yeah. I just want to bring Denny back in here. What have you got to say about this, Denny? Feedback. Okay. Morad, would you like to just come in here?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's also the American Dental Association who has said that they advise against not using fluoridated water to mix baby formula as well, and that's because the exposure to fluoride is not just in water, it's also in several other sources. And so, there isn't really control about how much fluoride you're ingesting. And fluoride is found in many, many different things, black tea, green tea, several sources, So how much fluoride are you taking into your body?
This is the thing, isn't it? It's the cumulative amount as well, because obviously you're saying it is in tea, and it's especially in older tea, I think, isn't it? Is it as the leaves get older?
I'm not sure about. I think it's down to also the water that's been used to sort of grow the tea, the tea leaves and so on. Because there's certain teas that will have it and some that don't. Black tea, green tea does. But the point is that how much fluoride, if it's safe at a certain level, or how much water are people drinking? How much tea are they drinking? How much sort of foods are they having with fluoride in it? What dose are people getting?
I'd just like to bring John back in here because this is a very interesting point, because this fluoride obviously it gets into the food chain. If the water's fluoridated, it's getting everywhere.
That's right. It goes into all the food, into all our food. If you're buying food from a fluoridated area, or you're buying beer from a fluoridated area, or anything from a fluoridated area, you will be getting fluoride. So you will be getting it several times over in different sources. Yeah, you're quite right. And what happens is the body excretes about half of it. Half of it stays in the body. And it's a very reactive compound. And it'll affect all sorts of your glands, and your bones, and all sorts of things. It's a very pernicious poison.
So what do you think of this 1 part per million, John? Do you think that's safe in drinking water?
No, there's been lots of studies that show it's not safe for a whole range of different reasons. The problem is, what happens is, it's difficult to replicate having fluoride over your lifetime, because people want to do a quick study that lasts about 6 months or a year or a couple of years, or maybe a little bit longer, but they don't really want to spend the whole lifetime doing it. So then you can't feed people a large dose because they know that will cause them damage. So they can't do the experiments, and so they don't listen to the epidemiological evidence, so they don't get any evidence about the longer term effects. So what happens is, over years and years and years, you're accumulating more and more and more. It's more and more becoming a problem in your body, but no one recognises it because it tends to be linked to other things like pre-senile dementia or bone problems or thyroid problems. It's not seen as being fluoride. The only way that you find out if it is fluoride is you do an autopsy on the body and find it's full of fluoride. And there's nowhere in the UK that tests fluoride, so we don't know. You just have all these symptoms that are higher in fluoridated areas, but they don't accept that as proof because there could be some other cause for each individual one of them.
scary actually. MPs approved fluoride in tap water. This is a recent document. Controversial plans to make it easier for authorities to allow fluoride to be added to drinking water were given the go-ahead by MPs. They were approved despite some claims that fluoridation is linked to infant mortality, cancer, Down syndrome and bone damage. Critics say the new law, which will give health authorities greater power to introduce the chemical into tap water, will force-feed poison to households. MPs approved the plans for England and Wales as part of the water bill, which cleared the Commons last night. A bid to block the fluoridation of water was defeated on a free vote by 284 to 181. I guess it depends who's in at the time.
Well, that is very, very important, because what I think the way it works is because fluoride, selling fluoride, hexafluoric acid to people is a really important source of income for these companies who are making fertilizer, because otherwise they would have to dump it as a toxic waste, which would cost a lot of money. It's much easier to sell it, put it in our water. So what they do is they employ loads of lobbyists to lobby the Department of Health and MPs. I understand when the last bill was being discussed, they had literally hundreds of lobbyists working on it. And of course, there's no one's financial interest, there's no one who opposed it who has got that sort of financial clout. So there's no lobbyists the other way. So you get lobbyist after lobbyist getting onto MPs and onto the Department of Health, saying this is good for teeth and so on, and it's not. They just say it and they sort of accept it, because partly it's been the mantra of the last 30 or 50 years that fluoride is good for teeth. And there's actually very scant evidence on that. And what's happened is, in fact, they've skewed the data. They've looked at 5-year-olds because, well, that's actually the only time in the whole of your lifetime there's any discernible effect, even that's time. But what's happened is that in fluoridated areas, they've found 50 studies that have shown that children have actually, in fluoridated areas, their teeth erupt about a year later. So that's why they tend to have slightly fewer fillings, not that many. And so it's actually showing that there's a systemic poisoning our children because their teeth are erupting a year later. It's not a good sign. It's not saying their teeth are better. It's just saying they erupt a year later.
Yeah, it carries on this article. It says water companies have had the power to add fluoride to supply since 1985, but the majority have not done so for fear of legal action. Under the new bill, health authorities will indemnify firms where it is necessary for public health. It's interesting. The proposal is backed by the British Dental Association, of course, which last week warned that children who drink bottled water may be putting their teeth at risk because they're missing out on fluoride. Its chief executive, Ian Wiley, said last night, targeted water fluoridation is a safe and effective public health measure which has the potential to improve the dental health of thousands of people. There's no proof of this, though, is there really?
No, and if you look across the world, at all the different countries who look fluoride or not, you find that the ones that don't have fluoride tend to have better teeth. And for instance, actually, well, it also happens in the UK and any country. If you look at different areas, the non-fluoridated areas often are the best teeth. Recently, actually, in Cumbria, they stopped fluoridation about 8 years ago because of a technical issue. And what happened was, actually, the most recent statistics show that teeth have got better since the fluoride has gone out. Now they're going to put it back in again and do a 6-year trial costing $1.5 million to try and show that there is a benefit, when obviously it's just not proven. What happened in the 60s is that there were the people who were selling the systems paid for trials which were biased, and they showed a very positive benefit of fluoride.
This all came in about 1969, didn't it, John?
Yes, that's right. Yes, and there's a lot of, what happened was there were massive legal cases against people for letting hydrogen fluoride out of factory chimneys, and it was causing the cattle around there massive damage. And so they said they did the biggest legal cases ever in US history. So they basically said they've got to trap the fluoride coming out of the chimneys, and they use it, and that's what happens when they get hexafluoric acid from. It traps the fluoride going out and puts it into this solution, which they then have to get rid of, and so they sell it. They pressurize MPs and so on, take it to sell it, to put it in water rather than having to dispose of the toxic waste stuff.
That's right. This is something that people really need to know, I think, is that it was a byproduct of an industry. It's a toxic byproduct.
And it's also got pollutants in there like arsenic.
Yeah.
So, in theory, we're not going to be adding arsenic to our water, but we are adding this.
Well, fluoride is a mixture of many compounds, isn't it? There's lots of different compounds in fluoride. Just can I just read this bit out, because it's quite interesting. I'd like you to comment on this, John. The Department of Health says adding fluoride to the water supply will halve the incidence of tooth decay and cut dental health inequalities across the country.
Well, there's no evidence for that. They are making that up. It doesn't cut it by half. What they said in Southampton, what happened is everywhere they go, they say, oh, how terrible tooth health is. And then they put pictures of young children having to have their teeth removed because they've got serious decay. And that is not caused by fluoride or not fluoride by any stretch of the imagination. It's caused by bottles and people putting these mouth stoppers in with sugar on them that the children's mouths. And that causes decay. It's nothing to do with fluoride. And in fact, look at just the fluoride, there is no benefit at all by the time they're adult. And possibly a tiny benefit when they're 5 years old because the teeth have erupted a year later. And so it's actually damaging the body, and they don't look damage to the body side. They're just, when they did their consultation, so-called, they put all this sort of statistics into there, which were all wrong, provably wrong, and they got away with it.
Yeah, we're going to go to another guest, bring another guest in if you want to stay with us, John.
Yeah.
Lastly, a Conservative MP, John Butterfield, said the move to add fluoride was appalling, adding the government will be challenged on this in the courts. Were you aware of that?
Well, it certainly should be. Both of the councils, Southampton City Council and Hampshire County Council, are planning, have said they will challenge if they try to put in the water, the fluoride in the water. And it's ridiculous because the new legislation is meant to give councils the say on this sort of thing. And public health is going against the whole spirit of the thing straight away.
Yeah, we're going to go to our next guest now. Jaya Shayla Drolmer has made a film called Firewater about Australia's fluoride programme. She also joins us via Skype. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, sorry to keep you waiting, but this is getting very interesting. So I saw some of your film. Can you tell me how you got involved in this?
It's an interesting thing. I had a personal journey for a long time of being ill right through my childhood, and not really any big reasons as to why I should be ill. And I had kidney problems, I had thyroid problems, and I could never join the dots. And it was actually when I was at university that I did a film on chemical overloads, people that suffer from chemical sensitivities. And I happened to meet a fluoride activist in Australia, and from that point I started to be able to connect the dots on my own personal health. But it was actually when I was requested as a filmmaker to interview a single, I guess you'd call her a sufferer, someone who's toxic and can't handle chemicals very well. And I went down to interview her, and I ended up with 19 interviews. And that's how the film Firewater was born. It was a community request and a demand, and so many people had their voices that needed to be heard, but they weren't getting a chance, and they were being ignored by authorities. And that's how the film Firewater came out. People can watch that film for free online. It's firewaterfilm.com. And there's a lot of information on the fluoride issue from both an international level and the Australian fight to remove hydrofluorosilicic acid and its other compounds from the water.
Yeah, it says here that 80% of Australia's water is fluoridated. Is that correct?
Oh, it's more than that. We're getting up around, they're trying to fluoridate every last single body of water that's, got no hydrofluorosilicic acid in it. In Australia, we use three compounds. We use sodium fluoride, sodium fluorosilicate, and hydrofluorosilicic acid. We get our fluoride from China, who don't fluoridate their water, but they send their waste product to Australia. We get our fluoride from Belgium. They also don't fluoridate their water, but send their waste to Australia. And we get our bulk of our product from Intersect Pivot down in Geelong. And these products are literally the pollution that is scraped out of the smokestacks of the aluminium phosphate fertiliser industry. It's scraped down using water, and it goes into a sort of soluble mass, and they either dry it out and bag it up, or they send it as a liquid and they dump it in our drinking water. The thing is they can't dump this stuff in the air, they can't dump it into the ocean, they can't dump it into the earth. But if you bag it up and put it in a public water supply and call it a product, they get away with it. And that is exactly what's happening around the world in the remaining countries that are fluoridating. And this is not an Australian fight, this is an international fight to remove this toxin, which is basically industry dumping their waste in our water cheaply so they don't have to pay big fees to dispose of it ethically and legally. So we're basically kidneys are used as the filtering systems for this industry waste.
Yeah, it's something that's been forced on the public, really, that there's no real evidence that people want it in the water supply, is there, John?
No, well, there's a 72% were opposed here, despite the very pro-fluoride campaign that the Treaty Health Authority ran, costing hundreds of thousands of pounds. We opposed it with about a fiver between us. So 72% of people opposed it. So it's definitely not popular as soon as people hear about it. And all the letters in the press are heavily against it. The only ones that ever in favour of it are actually from the people responsible for the Strategic Health Authority. What's happened when they dismembered the Strategic Health Authority? What's happened? These people have gone to Public Health England and places like that, but are still there doing exactly the same thing.
As we found out earlier from their comment,
Yeah.
they don't really want to come on the show. They want to do a damage limitation exercise that if you send in some questions, they'll answer them, or in my experience, what they'll do is they'll find a way of not answering them and put it down as an answer.
Yeah, they did come down when we had our so-called consultation. They did come down. They did send the dentist down, the chief dental officer, to face the public, and he was roundly booed. All people, the vast majority of people there were very, very anti what he was saying. He was just refusing to face the non-dental stuff because he's a dentist. He doesn't know that anyway. But it's all this other stuff that's the really worrying stuff. Is what it does to the body. I've ingested over years.
So I've got Jay, in Australia, is it the same? Is it the dental profession that tends to be pushing this agenda?
Absolutely. It's an interesting thing. Dentists actually have no idea where fluoride comes from, nor do they actually know what it is that's in our water, and they, for the most part, think it's pharmaceutical grade that we're ingesting. Well, it's not. This is an industrial, unrefined grading of pollution, basically, and it is also laced, as one of the other speakers mentioned, with all kinds of co-contaminants. Arsenic, lead, mercury, and radioisotopes are involved because it's mined from uranium rock is involved with it as well. So you have all these other co-contaminants. And how can you actually measure a dose? And I actually want to bring up the point. One of your other speakers was talking about dose, and it's very important that listeners understand the difference between dose and concentration. At the water board, when they put the stuff in, they say, well, we put it in at 1 part per mil. Now, when you're ingesting that is 1 litre is 1 milligram, which is 1 part per million. But if you drink 4 litres, that's 4 milligrams. So there's no such thing as a safe dose anyway, because you're dealing with hydrofluorosilicic acid or its fellow bed buddies, sodium fluoride and sodium fluorosilicate. And if you're, an athlete and you drink up to 10 litres of tap water a day, you're getting 10 milligrams of fluoride a day. Now you cannot, and that is just from water. But what about all the other sources where you're getting fluoride from? Anything that's grown with tap water, anything that's made with tap water. Fluoride concentrates when it's boiled. You cannot remove it from the water unless by reverse osmosis or distillation. That is why it's such an insidious issue, because you can't just filter it out with a carbon filter. So these are very important. And I also wanted to mention that infant warning in America. We don't even get the dignity of an infant warning in Australia. Now, infants are getting about 250 times what is found naturally in the breast at 0.004. So they're getting, 1 part per million is 250 times that dose, and it's an industrial grade, and the blood-brain barrier just is not formed to be able to protect an infant from an onslaught of, basically it's an insult.
It's terrible,
chemical
really.
enzymes,
We're going to just
right.
take a quick break. Can you just hold that thought? And this is Windows on the World this Friday evening. If you want to call in, it's 0203 714 2700. We'll be discussing fluoride and more after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back to Windows on the World this Friday evening. We're talking about fluoridation of the water supply. And we've got Morad in the studio, John and Jaya by Skype. Just before the break, we were talking to Jaya about the blood-brain barrier in children and how fluoride could cross that because they're ingesting far too much of it. Are you still there, Jaya?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, can you carry on with that point, please?
Yes, basically in America at least, the AMA has at least given the dignity of an infant warning, basically warning mothers not to give their children fluoridated water. However, in Australia we get no such warning. Our medical authorities, or actually our health authorities, are not even giving that warning. They refuse to. And it's an interesting thing, but Dr. Doug Everingham, who's one of the interviewees in Firewater, he was the Minister for Health in the Whitlam era. He was the top minister. He signed fluoridation into Australia. Well, since he signed it in, he's then spent the rest of his life, he's now in his 90s, trying to get fluoride out of the water. He's a pretty interesting character, Doug Everingham. He's a medical doctor, but he was also the Minister for Health and signed it into Australia. So why would somebody of his standing then spend the rest of his life trying to fight to get it out? There must be something about it. I also really want to mention too that in toothpaste, we were talking about it before, S5 is the label for a toothpaste. In Australia they've removed that label completely, but what we're drinking is not pharmaceutical grade, it is an industrial grade in a S6 and S7 schedule level. So these are, top level schedules. They're not meant to be ingested. And fluoride, at any rate, is only meant to be used topically. It only works topically. It is not meant to be digested. And in Australia, we're in a mental crisis. We've had fluoridation for 60 years. And yet Tasmania, which was fluoridated in 1953, has the worst teeth in the whole of Australia. And we're in massive dental crisis. It's a crazy thing. So I want to reiterate that dose is not the same as concentration by a long shot. So they can say 1 part per million, but how can you monitor the dose? What was your dose yesterday? What was your dose today? What is your dose tomorrow? How much are you ingesting through just your tap water and foods made with water, and also water that's been boiled or foods that have been boiled? You're getting concentrated doses. So very important to remember this when you're dealing with fluoride. And the last thing I really want to hammer home is that on an ethical level, purely, there's no informed consent to treatment, which is the basis of medical practice. And they're flinging a supposed medical practice on us for a supposed disease of dental decay, and yet we have no choice in the matter, and there's no informed consent to treatment. And I think you'll find that there's many universal bioethics and human rights which would disagree with that tack of no informed consent to treatment.
Well, that's absolutely correct, because we just seem to be, the victims of our governments now. And I know I've heard a lot of what's happening in Australia. It's quite disturbing, because a lot of people there, up until about 10 years ago, thought it was a much freer place to be, didn't they?
Absolutely. Australia is definitely a very changed country. I wouldn't say it's the best place in the world to live anymore. But if you just stick to the fluoridation issue, it's been forced through. Queensland is a classic example. It just was shoved through really quick, smart. And down in Mildura, where they put up a mighty fight against fluoridation, 98% of people did a proper referendum, and they all said no, and the government still came in and forced it anyway. So you have to put some dots together as to why they would want to force a measure, and the public has already said no at 98%. So we're definitely under a dictatorship, and people don't want fluoride, but it's still being forced through. And besides, I pay my own dental bills. If my teeth rot and fall out, that's my business, and I don't need a nanny state government to tell me that I have to have hydrofluorosilicic acid water to treat my dental decay. And besides, if you're an old person and don't even have teeth anymore, why should they have to ingest it? So, I mean, these are petty arguments, really. It still comes down to informed consent to treatment as an ethical basis. And that is a worldwide consideration when you're dealing with all the countries still fluoridating, like USA, they're fighting hard to get rid of it. The UK, parts of UK, Ireland are putting up a mighty fight, and Australia, of course, New Zealand. All these countries, this is an international fight to remove the dictatorship of the hand-in-hand political corporate industry waste pushers shoving this stuff in our water and calling it a medical treatment. It's not safe, it's not effective. There's no long-term safety data anywhere in the world for the ingestion of fluorosilicates in our water.
Well, this is very interesting, but I mean, what they're going to say about us, we're suffering from anti-authoritarian disorder, aren't we? We can't be getting enough fluoride. So,
it's not like it's what I put in my body, so there's no authority needed for me to make a choice as to what I put in the body. And it should be everybody's individual informed consent to treatment. As simple as that.
Well, it is quite simple.
I'm against authority, but I am very much against being forced something that I don't wish to have in my body. If my teeth rot and fall out, that's my business. It's nobody else's business. And nobody needs to be told how what we have to have in our bodies.
Yeah, we're just suffering from a massive overdose of nanny state with a big fist in this country. It's probably the same there.
Absolutely.
But we're just a bit light of the subject, which is quite serious. But Murad, what do we do about this?
Well, it's interesting. Just on that particular point, if the fluoride has been added as a health, treatment, what about vitamin C? What about antioxidants? Why not add that as well? The argument doesn't really stack up, does it? And also, there's another thing that John touched on, the studies. There's an issue of substantiation and authority, because if there's 2,000 studies saying fluoride not good, the most authoritative of the ones I've seen is the US National Resource Council review in 2006, which basically raised the red flag and say, shouldn't do it until there's further studies. So, why is it still happening? And secondly, if there's one study from the Department of Health who are considered an authority, then all of a sudden those 2,000 studies are unsubstantiated. You see what I mean? So there's that kind of scientific debate. It's become a technocracy, isn't it? The detail, the scientific knowledge you need to be able to review a study and actually take it apart and say, well, that's not, there's no basis behind that. You've got scientists arguing, and then you've got policymakers, and then, there's just that big void in the middle, isn't there?
Yeah, the policy's decided to fit the science, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of, in terms of treatment then, well, that's why we were put into existence Osmio Water. We have systems, targeted at taking it out. So if you don't want it in your water, you've got the choice to take it out, and it's all about choice, isn't it? So, there's plenty of systems available for you to do that. That's, we're here because of that exact reason, because where else can you go? You can't get it in the supermarket, and the big businesses don't want to touch these products, and there is a bit of anti-government sentiment towards the products that we do as well, which is why the big retailers don't do them. So reverse osmosis is by far the most practical way of doing it, and then you've also got distillation as well. But then it's important to make sure that when you've removed fluoride and other things, chemical disinfectants, fluoride is one ingredient in tap water. There's hundreds of others, So chemical disinfectants by far the largest thing added into the water. chlorine, chloramine. Chloramine is slightly tasteless, so it's difficult to detect in water. But these create disinfection byproducts. Disinfection byproducts have been studied for their carcinogenic effects and other stuff. And if there's that much fluoride, there's that much.
Yeah, well, we've no idea really how much is in there. They're saying, this is the ideal 1 part per million. Well, there's no standard dose of this that go. Some people are much more susceptible to the ill effects of it than others, as we've heard. Yeah. But also these other chemicals that are put in, we don't know what water companies are putting in because our water's not that monitored, is it?
Well, we know what they're putting in because they're putting in chlorine predominantly. They're putting in chlorine, filtering to about 20 micron, putting in chlorine, sending it back out again. Some of the water companies, there's a handful of them in the UK that are doing it, so not everywhere is fluoridated, but you've still got fluoride in the water, natural fluoride. So the important thing to remember in that respect is that look at when the water leaves your waterworks, you could be 30 miles away from when that gets to your tap. It's got to go through the network and pumping stations through Victoria.
That's what I meant, really. We don't really know what's in it.
You don't. And if you test it at the point of use, which is your tap, then you'll know exactly what's in it. So you have to test it.
So just going back to John and Jaya out there. So John, how do you purify your water?
Well, I have a filter on, but at the moment, of course, we don't have fluoride. So I would have to sort of reverse osmosis if we did get fluoride. The problem is, as you're saying, it's not just what's coming to the house, because actually it's in all the products. So that's the groundwater clean. And the other thing, it's when you go to a restaurant, you get water, you tap it, you can't have that either. So it's pervasive.
Yeah.
Well, one thing, I don't want to talk about the medication, because one of the reasons we said it was immoral to put it in was because you're forcing people to take what is an effective medication. And there was a case in Scotland some time ago, 20, 30 years ago, where Lord Jauncey ruled that it was a medication. And that's why Scots are safe from having fluoride put in, because everyone knows fluoride will never pass as being safe or effective or pure, which a medicine has to be. So it's never been tested as a medicine. It wouldn't qualify, it would fail miserably. So, but they then say it's not a medicine, it's food. What's happened is that by saying it's a food, they've got around the regulations. But now the EU has said that it's illegal to add anything that's not on their food list into food. And fluoride is not on the food list because, again, it's not on there because it's unsafe. So, in theory, as of the 20th of January this year, fluoride is illegal to be added to water or food, anything that we eat or drink. But someone's going to have to take a test case to prove that.
That's really interesting. And now we're hearing that they may be putting lithium into the water supply as well. Are you aware of that?
I wasn't aware of that. In the EU, they have certain things that are allowed to be added. Fluoride isn't one of them.
Yeah, okay, we're just going over to Jaya now because we're going to have to move on after this. But have you got any last words, Jaya?
I would love as many people as possible to watch Firewater. It's very raw. It was a technical fix film when we did it. We did it on less than a smell of an oily rag. It was done. I'm not a camera person, but we pulled it together and the research sound. Every alternative news network plus many scientists uphold the film as being technically correct in terms of the research. There's also a second film on that same website, firewaterfilm.com, that you can watch, which is called Don't Look, Won't Find. And that was the second film which I launched in, I think it was April last year. And that actually deals with the NHMRC in Australia and how 22 years ago they recommended hypersensitivity testing for the sensitive. Now, 10% of the population are known to be sensitive, according to if you take the logic of the bell-shaped curve. But that testing has never been done. So 22 years later, they still haven't done the hypersensitivity suffering. There's still no avenues for people to be able to get tested in Australia. In fact, they've gotten rid of most of the independent laboratories. You can test for the blood, but if you're toxic, really the only way you can test it is through bone sampling or blood, and we don't have the facilities in Australia to deal with it with blood. So it's very, very hard to get tested for fluoride toxicity. And also doctors and the medical profession and dental profession are not trained to look for symptoms. They have no idea what symptoms there are. There's a very good book by Bruce Spittle called Fluoride Fatigue, and that goes through hypersensitivity symptoms. But most doctors, they have no clue what they're diagnosing, and somebody that has perhaps early arthritis, it actually could simply be fluoride toxicity. And I know myself, in my own journey, once I removed fluoridated water from my diet, and I'm very careful to eat as much fresh as I can, but I still get fluoride because things that are made of tap water do have fluoride in it. But once I remove that fluoride, my symptoms, for the most part, went away. But I do have some damage from my years of growing up in Perth, which was heavily fluoridated.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot, Jer. We're going to have to take a break now. Morad, would you just like to give your website?
Yeah, sure. Website is osmiowater.co.uk. It's spelled OSMIO. If you just Google Osmio, you'll find us. And if you need to call us, we'll give you advice. If you don't know whether the water company adds fluoride, I can just give you a quick list of companies.
Well, we can't. We have, unfortunately, we've run out of time. It's been absolutely wonderful today. The time's flown over.
Yeah.
Thanks to John and Jaya. After the break, we will be joined by Paloma Castro and Max Bliss talking chemtrails on Windows on the World. So stay with us. See you after the break.